Mishra, the Eminent One, brother to Urza, was raised by Takasia, a friend of their long-past father. Eventually, the two of them would stumble upon the caves of Kolios, where they unknowingly would find the sealed door to Phyrexia. Here they would attempt to take a unique power stone from the depths of the cavern, only to split the stone in two. One would be named the Might Stone and given to Urza, and Mishra's named the Weak Stone, based on the properties it held. Eventually, jealous of the stone his brother held, Mishra would confront Urza, and their conflict would erupt in a magical explosion that would claim the life of their adoptive mother Takasia. The brothers holding these stones ultimately would lead to the proliferation of the taint of Phyrexia on Dominarian soil, as the stones, whole, acted as a lock to the door to Phyrexia in the caves of Kolios. Now, the once enthusiastic siblings will succumb to the ravage of time, envy, and war. This would eventually lead to the brothers engaging the entirety of the world of Dominaria in a conflict that would span decades and claim countless lives. As Mishra slowly became consumed by his own inner demons, the taint of Phyrexia would seep not only into Dominaria, but through the influence of the Praetor Gix, would also enter into Mishra's mind, as he craved more powerful war machines to battle his brother and his ornithopters and other technological marvels of war and intrigue. Mounting the great Phyrexian dragon engines, he waged a more brutal and devastating carnage on encampments and cities under the protection of Urza. Eventually, even Mishra's body would succumb to the Phyrexian melding of flesh and metal and glistening oil, before finally being destroyed by Urza's igniting of the Silex, which would reunite the Might and Weak stones into his own flesh. This sets up the equivalent of a climate-altering nuclear blast, starting an ice age on Dominaria, and consuming Mishra's life forever. Hey there, hope you guys enjoyed that story bit. I realize I can't do these for every single deck tech because holy crap, that would be a lot, especially with Mishra. Like, there's way more to his story than what I was able to show here. But it is important, I think, for some of the more prominent Magic the Gathering characters to have their stories told, so yeah, we'll do it for Mishra. But anyway, today we are going to be talking about Mishra Eminent One, a artifact commander that was available as a pre-con commander, and luckily for us, that means that it is a very, very cheap card to get a hold of. But T1741 asked if I could do a budget vehicles deck, and they would love to see it. So I guess today we're going to be talking about Mishra, the used car salesman. We're going to be building Mishra as a vehicles deck. Now, why are we doing that? Well, let's take a look at his ability. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of any non-creature artifact you control, except its name is Mishra's Warform, and it's a 4/4 construct in addition to its other types, and it gains haste. We then have to sack it at the end of the turn, basically. So why are we doing this? Well, we're going to be building a bunch of vehicles and then turning them into people and then gaining advantage from letting them die repeatedly or enter the battlefield repeatedly. You know what? Here, let's go ahead and show you the first card that we're talking about of the deck. This will give you an idea of what we're going to be working with. This is the Knight Paladin. It's a vehicle that when it enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage to each opponent. But with Mishra, we're going to be dealing 4 damage when it comes out onto the board, and then when we enter combat, we're going to deal 4 more damage because it's going to enter the board as a token, and then that token's going to swing at somebody, dealing 4 more damage to them. That's going to be 12 damage the turn it comes out to one person who's unlucky, and 8 damage to the rest of the board, and then every turn, until they get rid of the Knight Paladin, we're going to be burning them for 4 damage every single time this comes out. Now, it's not just going to be this that's going to be dealing that damage. We've got more cards that are going to be allowing us to replicate that, let's go ahead and say. But that's just a taste of what we're going to be doing in the deck. To show you how we're going to be getting the mana to make all of these nutty things happen in the deck, let's go over to the ramp section, starting with the Careening Mine
Heart. This card, when it attacks, we create a treasure token. So we're going to drop this on the board. We're never really going to crew it. We're just going to create hasty tokens with Mishra and then generate treasure using this thing. We also have the Unstable Obelisk. It's a colorless artifact ramp card, but you can pay 7, sack it to destroy target permanent. Now, normally this ain't a great card, but we are 1 in a budget deck, so we need versatile ways to blow up anything on the board, and 2, because we are going to be ramping so hard in this deck, it's okay to run something like this in it because we're going to have the spare mana for it, and we're not really blowing up our obelisk. We're going to blow up the obelisk clone that Mishra creates. We also have a budget staple, the Charcoal, the Sky, and the Fire Diamond, all of which are available for like 5 to 8 cents and give us our ramp in our Grixis package. Honored Heirloom, one of my favorite ways to keep all Reanimator players honest while also being a mana rock. We also get the ability to just clone it and smack somebody with it for 4 if we need to. That's the way it is with all these mana rocks. If we run out of vehicles, we just start spawning mana rocks on the board and hitting people with them. Hedron Archive, another mana rock, taps for 2 colorless mana. We can also sack it to draw 2 cards. We're never going to sack it, though. We'll sack the Mishra token. Command Sphere, it creates a mana of any color, and we can sack it to draw a card. But with Mishra, we're just going to be sacking the clone. Foundry Inspector, all of our artifacts cost 1 less to cast. Enthusiastic Mechanaut, all of our artifacts cost 1 less to cast. The Belligerent, this is a funny ramp card we're going to be using. When it attacks, we create a treasure token just like the Creating Mine card. But until the end of turn, we also get the chance to look at the top of our library and play any lands and cast any spells from the top. So we get to swing in with the Belligerent. And then on main phase 2, we gain the ability to not only put our land for turn from the top of the library, which saves us cards in hand, but also we get the ability to just start casting whatever is on top there. This is functionally both ramp and draw for us, as it is an advantage piece in every way, shape, and form. Mindstone, yet another, I can sack this thing to draw a card if I need to, but also it's a ramp card that Mishra is going to abuse. Horde Hauler, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token for each artifact they control. So you've got a mini Dockside Extortionist that we are going to be creating with Mishra as a 4/4 hasty trampler because it does gain all the properties that the vehicle has. We do lose a little bit of power when we create the clone, but I mean, we get to crash this thing into everybody all the time now, so it's just going to be free value, free real estate. Then we have Prize Statue. When it enters the battlefield, we make a treasure token, and when it dies, we make a treasure token. So the turn we play this, we're making 3 treasures. We're dropping it on the board, making a treasure, cloning it, making a treasure, and then the clone will die, making a treasure. It's a super fast ramp piece for us, and it's going to do a ton of work. Wayfarer's Bauble, we can sack this to get any basic land from our library onto the battlefield. As per usual, you might not want to use the first Wayfarer's Bauble that you play it, and if you have nothing else to do with Mishra, start letting him replicate the Wayfarer's Bauble and get more lands out of your deck. Then we have the RMS Titanic. This normally would be a 7/1 flying trampler, but for us it's a 4/4 flying trampler with haste because of Mishra. When it deals combat damage to a player, sack it and create that many treasure tokens. So we're going to play this for 4, clone it for 0, and create 4 treasures and just generate tons of advantage that way. We're going to have all of the mana. And then finally, Cursed Mirror. Now, this one does eat up a little bit of the $15 budget that we're running in for this deck, but the Cursed Mirror enters the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. So you know how Mishra said that it can only clone non-creature permanents, non-creature artifacts? Yeah, we're just going to clone Cursed Mirror, and that's going to give us the ability to ignore that clause entirely. Now we have the ability to clone our creatures. Now we have the ability to clone our opponent's creatures. This is a super, super strong ability for us. We want to protect our Cursed Mirror at all costs. But speaking of clones, that's not the only way we're going to be doing it, because we have one last, not really ramp piece, but also kind of ramp piece, the Machine God's Effigy. This is in the deck section called Copies. We have 5 ways of copying various things. The Machine God's Effigy comes in as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, and unlike the Cursed Mirror, it does it permanently. So we create a copy of any creature on the battlefield, and then Machine's God's Effigy maintains its status of not being a creature, so we can then create Mishra clones with that as well. So we've got 2 ways to make creature clones with Mishra. Then we have Tawnos, Urza's Apprentice. It's got haste. We can pay 2 mana and tap it to copy an activated or trigger ability from any artifact source that we control. So here's a fun thing we can do here with this. Let's say we have the Knight's Paladin, and it comes into the board, dealing 4 damage. Then we have Tawnos, copy that ability, making it deal 4 more damage. And then every turn, when we clone the Knight's Paladin, Tawnos is going to make it deal 4 more damage as well. So now we're dealing 8 damage to everybody every turn for 2 mana. We're just spending 2 mana on this. We also have the Adric Mathematical Genius. Pay 3 mana and tap it, copy activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. This means we can copy Mishra's ability. This means we can copy the Knight Paladin ability. If we've got Tawnos, Adric, and the mana, we're spending 5 mana, and we are basically hitting people with 12 damage every single turn cycle. This card, people are going to have to get rid of it. And then we have Brutaclad. Creature tokens you control all get haste, which doesn't matter for us too much because of the type of deck we're running, but it does matter for Brutaclad's second ability. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 2/1 blue Phyrexian Mirror artifact token, and then you can choose a token you already control, and then each other token you control becomes a copy of that token. So what are we going to be doing here? Well, we're going to drop the Brutaclad down, and then we're going to layer our triggers so that at the beginning of combat, Mishra is going to create a token of one of our cards. Let's say any creature we've created a token with Machine God's Effigy. And then we're going to create the 2/1 Blue Myr token. And then we're going to make the Blue Myr token a copy of the token that Mishra created. So let's say that we've got something like that RMS Titanic. We're creating a 2/1 Myr that's a copy of the Titanic, and then we're going to be swinging it and the 4/4 version of the Titanic at somebody's face, automatically giving us the ability. Actually, no, it's not going to be a 2/1 Myr anymore. It's going to be a 4/4 at that point. Then we're going to be hitting somebody for 8. We're going to be generating 8 treasures, and we're going to be casting our spells for basically free till the end of time. The last copy card we have here is called the Dermataxi. As it enters the battlefield, exile a creature from any graveyard. We can tap 2 untap creatures we control, and then Dermataxi becomes a copy of that exiled card, except it is a vehicle in addition to its other types. So this card, what we're primarily going to be doing with it is we are going to be letting this sit on the board as a cloning device for our commander. We're going to clone Dermataxi, exile a creature from somebody's graveyard that's problematic, so we want to keep the Reanimator player from having, and then we're going to just turn our cloned Dermataxi into a clone of that card using all the tokens the deck is going to be creating. Now, you've already seen some of the tokens with Brutaclad, but let's show you the other ways we're going to be creating tokens in this deck. We have 5 token generators that are designated token generators, not things like Brutaclad. Let's start with the Enchanted Carriage. For 5 mana, you create 2 1/1 white mouse tokens when it enters the battlefield, and of course, we're going to clone that with Mishra, making it to where we're going to create 2 mouse tokens a turn. Night Scythe creates a single black Necron artifact creature token when it comes into the board. Mishra's going to make that happen more often. The Nimble Right schematic and the Servo schematic each create colorless creature tokens, and then that happens when they enter the graveyard as well as when they enter the battlefield. So Mishra's going to create 2 tokens a turn with these, and then the Thunderhawk Gearship creates 2 white Astartes Warrior creature tokens when it comes into the battlefield, and anytime it attacks, all of our creatures gain flying until end of turn. So all of our Brutaclad tokens, no matter what they've cloned, will have flying to have the finishing hit. So the Thunderhawk Gearship is our best token generator of the bunch, probably next to Brutaclad, more so than anything else. It's probably one of the best ones that we have. Now, how are we going to get to these cards? We've talked about a bunch of things that the deck is doing. How are we going to make sure that it does that stuff that often? Well, we've got a very robust draw package, actually. And one of these draw cards is, yes, of course, a vehicle. This is Mishra the Used Car Salesman, after all. This is the Rib Skiff. It has Toxic 2, but that doesn't matter to us too much. Whenever it enters the battlefield, draw a card. So we create a clone of this with Mishra, draw a card immediately. The Mnemonic Spear Sacrifice it to draw 2 cards, so create a clone of it with Mishra, draw 2 cards. Thirst for Knowledge, draw 3 cards, then discard 2 unless you discard an artifact. This is at instant speed, so we're just going to blow up an artifact we don't need in our hand and get advantage with that. The Mephitic Drought and the Ichor Wellspring, both of these say when it enters the battlefield or is put into the graveyard, draw a card. The Drought also makes you lose a life, but really 1 life isn't that much of a cost to pay in a commander game with 40 life, and this is drawing us basically 2 cards a turn on top of our 1 card we're drawing per turn normally is massive. And then we have one with the machine. Draw cards equal to the highest mana value among artifacts you control. We have some pretty hefty machines we're going to be playing on the board, things that cost 4, 5, 6, 7. So you know that this card's going to be drawing us a lot of cards, and we're going to have the mana to pay for those cards because of all the treasures we are generating otherwise. This is the Bomat Bazaar Barge. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Yet another draw card vehicle we get to play, and these are like 2 cents, 6 cents. We get a lot of value for very little with this deck. Then we have the Smuggler's Buggy. It has Hideaway 4, and when it deals combat damage to a player, cast the exile card without paying its mana cost. This is another way we get to cheat all of our cards into play. If we know that somebody is going to be free for an attack, then we're going to be cloning our Smuggler's Buggy, swinging it into somebody, getting that card for free. Then we have the Silent Submersible, a 2-mana artifact. When it deals combat damage to a player or a planeswalker, draw a card. So you can just tickle the Super Friends player over and over again, and this will draw you cards while you're doing it. More vehicles, more draw power. This one's not a vehicle, though. This is the Thopter Spy Network. When it enters the battlefield, or at the beginning of your upkeep, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter token with flying, and then if 1 or more artifact creatures deal damage to a player, which of course all of our creatures are artifact creatures because they're all going to be clones from Mishra, we get to draw a card. Weatherlight we have in here as well. The Weatherlight says when it deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 5 cards of your library, take any historic card from among them, and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So the Weatherlight is super simple for us. Our deck is mostly artifacts. We're going to create a 4/4 Weatherlight, and we're going to smack it into somebody, getting a free card of our choice from the top 4 of our deck, and then we get to laugh at our opponent basically forever. Then we have the Indomitable, yet another vehicle we will be cloning up with Mishra. It has Trample, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. Any creature at all. This is a coastal piracy while also being a card. We can cast the Indomitable from our graveyard as well, as long as we have 3 or more tapped pirates and or vehicles. We're going to have plenty of vehicles on the board, so all we have to do if we lose the Indomitable is just go ahead and crew our vehicles with our tokens, swing them into somebody, and then hold those creatures there so that we can get the Indomitable back up. This is a stupidly strong draw card we have access to. Now, Mishra's going to be cloning lots of things. We don't care if Mishra dies a bunch because his effect works at haste speed anyway. But let's say that Mishra dies. How are we going to protect the car salesman? We have 2 ways of protecting the car salesman. Giant's Amulet, when it ETBs, we can pay 4 and create a 4/4 blue giant wizard creature token, which means we can use this ability when cloning the Giant's Amulet. But the most important thing is the equipped creature gets 0/1 and gets hexproof. And then we have Mirror Shield. Equipped creature gets 0/2 and hexproof, and then it's got another clause that doesn't matter for us. We have 2 ways of making sure that our creature stays on the battlefield. Now, what about when things do make it to the graveyard? How are we going to get those back up? Indomitable gets itself back up, but that's not all. So let's go ahead and talk about the recursion package in the deck. We have the Moriok Scavenger. When it comes into play, return any artifact creature card from our graveyard to our hand. That matters for us because one of the artifact creatures we are running is the Scrap Trawler. When the Scrap Trawler or any other artifact is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand any artifact card that has lesser mana value. So remember that clones retain all the properties of the cards that they clone. So the Scrap Trawler is going to be grabbing us whatever we want from our graveyard until our opponents get rid of the Scrap Trawler. If we lose the Scrap Trawler, then we're going to have Moriok Scavenger as a way to get it out. And remember, if they kill Scrap Trawler over and over again, as they don't get rid of the Scavenger, we just use things like Clone Mirror and then clone the Scavenger which then makes another scavenger ETB, which then gets us back the scrap trawler and some of the other artifact creatures you're going to be seeing in the deck. You've already seen a few: the enthusiastic mechanaut, the foundry inspector. These are things people are going to want to take off of our board because these artifacts have the ability to get us super far into the game. Brutaclad is another artifact creature that people are going to want to take away from us as soon as possible. So the Moriarch Scavenger being a repeatable way with the way that Urza is built to just keep getting those artifacts back, that's going to be helpful for us. But now there's one important place that we still have to talk about. And if you know me, you know that I like to run a lot of removal. I like to run a lot of interaction. I've even made videos talking about how people should run more interaction. And Mishra gets to abuse interaction like nobody's business. So let's look at the interaction package of the Mishra deck, starting with my favorite in the entire world, Meteor Golem. When it ETBs, blow up any non-land permanent and opponent controls. Now here's the thing with Meteor Golem. Now here's the thing with Meteor Golem. I've already told you that we have the ability to clone creatures, right? So we're going to clone Meteor Golem over and over again, blowing up any non-land permanent we have. If that does not work, we have the Spine of Ishath, which also lets us blow up anything on the board. It lets us do the Meteor Golem thing without having to go through the hoops of Meteor Golem. We also have the Executioner's Capsule. We can pay 2 mana and sack it to blow up any non-black creature. We're just going to clone this with Mishra and then sack it to blow up creatures. Then we have Soul Guide Lantern. This lets us once again blow up graveyards. It also has a draw clause on it as well, which is important. Lantern of the Lost also lets us blow up graveyards. This deck is going to make your Reanimator player at the table very, very upset. Then we have Disruption Protocol, a counterspell that costs 2 because we can just tap one of our vehicles to take care of one of the costs of it. Then we have Negate, counter any non-creature spell. So board wipes and stuff, we get to counter those with this. Though Mishra, luckily for us, the Mishra deck is actually almost immune to board wipes. Most board wipes hit just creatures. Mishra just gets to absorb those basically forever. He doesn't care if he costs 10 or 12 mana because his vehicles are still getting their abilities. Then we have Surge Hacker Mech. When it enters the battlefield, deal twice the number of vehicles you control in damage to target creature or planeswalker. We're going to have a lot of vehicles, so this is going to have a lot of damage. Then we have the Midnight Crusader Shuttle. Whenever it attacks, defending player faces a villainous choice. They must either sacrifice a creature or you get to steal one of their creatures until the end of turn. And if you gain control of a creature that way, you get to tap it and have it attack that player. So this is either going to blow up a thing they have, or you're just going to get free stuff from them all day long. Imagine stealing somebody's Archon of Cruelty and then ramming it into somebody. It must feel awful. Then we have the Transmogrifying Wand. This card comes into play with 3 charge counters, and then we can remove a charge counter to blow up a creature and give them a 2/4 white ox. So we're going to use this card liberally while we have it, but we're also going to clone it to blow up more things if we need to. Then we have the Tithing Blade. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature. We can also craft it with a creature to create the Consuming Sepulchre, but we're never going to do that. We're just going to leave this on the board and create a clone of it with Mishra, and the clone is going to say, my name is Fleshbag Marauder, forever. Then we have the Sky Sovereign, the console flagship. When it ETBs, deal 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker, and when it attacks, deal 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker. So what are we doing with this? Well, we're going to deal 3 damage the turn it comes down, and then we're going to clone it to deal 3 damage, and then we're going to swing with the clone to deal 3 damage. This is going to deal 9 damage across the board to our opponents for 5 mana the turn it comes out, and then for 0 mana, it's going to be dealing 6 damage to our opponent's board every single turn past that. However, that's not all. We also have the utility section, in which Ariat's Tempting Apple is one of our options. This is one of our non-vehicle options. When it enters the battlefield, gain control of a creature until the end of turn. Untap that creature, it gains haste. So every single combat, we're going to clone the apple, steal a creature, smack somebody with it, and then, yeah. Imagine your opponent has an Avenger of Zendikar, and you're just like, okay, cool. You had one Avenger of Zendikar, and that was threatening. I have as many Avenger of Zendikars as I have combats. So one of us is going to overtake the other eventually, and I think I know who it's going to be. Then we have the Smelting Vat. Pay 1 mana and sack an artifact. While tapping it, reveal the top 8 cards of our library. Put 2 non-creature artifacts of total mana value less than or equal to the mana value of the card we sacrificed onto the battlefield. So we clone something with Mishra, and then we use the smelting vat to kill it, and then we get like a 7 cost buffer, and we get to get 2 artifacts, up to 2 artifacts that are within that 7 cost buffer. Super, super easy card. It's functionally a draw spell for us that's cheating up creatures. Then we have the Audacious Reshapers. Sack any artifact, so again, usually the Mishra clone. Reveal cards on the top of your library until you hit an artifact card, put the rest in the bottom of your library. And then Audacious Reshapers deals damage to you equal to the number of cards that were revealed that way. And the artifact goes onto the battlefield for free. So we're going to take some damage, yes, but we're getting free artifacts. We don't care about taking damage. We get free artifacts. Then we have the Stasis Coffin. This thing's super abusable. Stasis Coffin. Exile it. You gain protection from everything until your next turn. So if we're on the defensive, just clone the Stasis Coffin, pay 2 and exile it. And the clone is going to protect us from everything until our next turn, over and over and over again. Now, what are we building up to? Obviously, I spoke just massive, massive happiness about the Knight's Paladin, talking about how it's going to burn people to death for us. But how are we going to be winning the game other than that? Well, think about all of the tokens we're making, how many of them are artifacts. Think about all the artifacts we're dropping on the board, the vehicles, the mana rocks, everything. Let me introduce you to cranial plating. Now, if you play Affinity, you know cranial plating. Equipped creature gets 1/0 for every artifact you control. We can pay 1 to equip it to a creature, and we can pay 2 to equip it to a creature at instant speed. So, cranial plating is really, really cool. We get to have our board of like 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 artifacts, throw the cranial plating onto the Mishra clone. Now the Mishra clone is swinging at somebody, usually with flying, for 20 damage. This is not going to slowly win the game for us. This is going to coup de grace whoever we happen to be sitting at. Whoever's in the best position on the table, we just hit them with cranial plating and then sit back and giggle because we get all the advantage from this card. If we do not get the cranial plating on the board in time, or if the cranial plating goes to the graveyard because our opponents kill it, remember, you have the Scrap Trawler to get it back. You have the Scrap Welder to get it back. Scrap Welder can sack an artifact with mana value X, return any artifact with mana value less than X from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, I mean, we can just clone a mana rock, like a 3-mana rock, and then the Scrap Welder is going to get it back. So this cranial plating, unless they exile it, we're going to be able to put this Executioner's Axe on any artifact creature we control. Now, we do have to get to the lands. I know people don't like talking about the lands so much. It is probably one of the more boring parts of some of the decks, but if we look at our ratios in the deck, we have a 61% colorless ratio on the deck, 8% black, 17% red, and 23% blue. What that means is we actually get to be very heavy on our basics, and while our ratios are heavier in certain colors, I do have us equal parts on all of our colors here because we want to cast our commander on time. But this means that aside from Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, 9 times out of 10, we can let things like the Ash Barrens and the Promising Veins just sit on the board as colorless mana. But when they need to go get the lands we need so that we can get Mishra out, they have the ability to do that. So Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse are cracking to get our colored lands. Shire Terrace, Ash Barrens, Promising Veins, Grixis Panorama, Jund Panorama, Esper Panorama, and Myriad Landscape. All of them are colorless mana that can also be sent to the graveyard by one means or another to get the land colors that we need. Command Tower, of course, is omni-fixing for our deck. And then we have Darkwater Catacombs and Shadow Blood Ridge. Our deck is all colorless mana, so we can filter colorless mana into these to get the colors that we are missing in the deck. But that's really all the color fixing the deck is going to need because, of course, the deck is mostly colorless. Almost every vehicle, almost every card is some form of colorless. It doesn't hurt us whatsoever to just have a butt ton of colorless things there. But anyway, that was Mishra, basically the used car salesman of Magic the Gathering, the way that we've built him. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the deck. I hope this fits the bill of a budget vehicle deck. I think that it's a super, super fun one. My old roommate actually used to run a version of this, and it's where I got the idea. We built him, Mishra the used car salesman, at one point in time. It turned out to be very, very powerful. And so I went, oh, okay, cool. That's interesting. Let's go ahead and build that for this challenge as well. But let's, scrimp that budget as tight as we can so that we can get the deck to be a $15.56 deck. This deck is incredibly cheap, but of course that's the name of the game for every single deck in this challenge. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Sorry that lore bits are going to be a little more sparse in future episodes. They are probably the most time-consuming part of the entire deck outside of the deck building process. But anyway, again, let me know what you guys think. Hit the like button if you haven't already, subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here.
Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Britzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.